Welcome at CEVRO Institut, School of Legal and Social Studies. My name is Josef Šíma. I'm president of this college. We have a very special event this afternoon. However, before we start with my introduction of our dear guest, let me say a few words about where we are for those who do not know actually. This is a main facility of CEVRO Institut, which is a private college established some 5 years ago as an offspring of CEVRO Liberal Conservative Academy, a free market liberal in European sense / conservative think tank. And the school is a place where we offer BA and MA programs in political science, international relations, private and public law, public administration, with courses and hopefully in the future also programs in economic policy, sociology, history. This school is special in numerous respects. As you can see, it is a beautiful historical facility, that's for one. But also, we want to be a unique school to provide an education which is not offered anywhere else. And that is, we want to offer a free market perspective on the respective sciences I have mentioned. For that purpose, we do not only educate our students, we also offer additional activities, both academic and non-academic. The school is opening up. Starting this fall, we will have for the first time international students, so that the school, once getting established locally, will actually be a place where not only foreign professors will come and teach, but also foreign students will come over and study here. To promote our international status, some time ago we established a lecture series, public lecture series, called CEVRO Institut Forum, where we host speakers both from academic circles and business circles. Today, however, we have a guest who is a unique one, who is not a businessman in a strict sense, who is not an academic in a strict sense either. We have a guest here who devoted his life to understanding politics and the skills to orchestrate success in politics. Our guest, Arthur Finkelstein, is a New York-based Republican Party consultant who has worked for conservative candidates in the United States, Canada, Israel, and Eastern Europe over the past 4 decades. His specialties are polling, strategy, message, media, ad placement, and advising on general campaign management. While a student at Columbia University, he interviewed and helped produce radio programs for Ayn Rand and was a volunteer at the New York headquarters of the Draft Goldwater Committee in 1963-64. In 1972, Arthur Finkelstein served as one of several pollsters for President Richard Nixon's re-election campaign, developing sophisticated demographic analysis. The 1972 election also saw the first of his 3 victorious campaigns to elect Jesse Helms as U.S. Senator from North Carolina. Arthur Finkelstein was viewed by many as instrumental in Governor Reagan's 1976 primary successes in North Carolina and Texas. He pioneered the concept of execution of independent expenditure campaigns, which would operate as a third force in an election beyond the control of candidate or party officials. Arthur Finkelstein was the chief strategist behind the most successful expenditure campaign operation culminating in Ronald Reagan's 1980 victory. A long list of successful campaigns of US politicians could follow to demonstrate effectiveness of his skills and strategies. However, his success is not limited to US politics. In 1996, he helped Benjamin Netanyahu and Shimon Peres as leaders of Israel, and his foreign activities multiplied as a consequence. In the new century, he has spent a lot of time working overseas with clients in Albania, Austria, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic indeed, Hungary, Kosovo, and the Ukraine. He has also continued to consult on Israeli elections. Back in the US, Arthur Finkelstein, for example, announced the organization of Stop Her Now, dedicated to defeating Hillary Clinton in the 2006 New York US Senate race. Unfortunately, this project cannot be counted as one of his successes. Some of his critics call him the ultimate sword of Dr. Strangelove. His defenders speak of his creative talents, brilliance in terms of analyzing polls and numbers, his dedication, his drive, and his workaholism. Not being myself a political strategist, I cannot appreciate sufficiently our guest's achievements in this field. However, there is one aspect of Arthur Finkelstein activities I have great sympathies for. His association with great ideas and their originators and promoters linked to individual liberty. Ayn Rand, Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan, and I'm sure many more I'm not aware of. Arthur Finkelstein had identified himself in public as a libertarian and an opponent of big government, which today, more than ever, is becoming a very great virtue and indeed a hot topic in political debates. Please join me in welcoming our dear guest, Arthur Finkelstein. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I always love to start off these talks with a survey story that goes back many, many years. There was a questionnaire which we ask to this day, the kinds of questions we ask. It says, from the following list of people, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of each? If you have no opinion or never heard of the person, just say so. Way back when, the first name was Richard Nixon, and this person said they never heard of him. The next name was the governor of New York, Nelson Rockefeller, and they said they never heard of him. We asked the three questions about three people who were running for the United States Senate, and this person said they never heard of any of them. The next question on the survey was, what's the most important issue facing the United States today? And he said apathy. He was right. He was right then, and he's right today. The most overwhelming fact of politics is what people do not know, rather than what they do know. And in fact, in politics, it's what you perceive to be true that's true, not truth. This is a very difficult concept for people who are rational. But for those of us who are engaged in politics, It has become the norm. For example, if I were to say to you, I just left Boston, which I did yesterday. It was snowing, and it's nice to be someplace where the weather is nice. You would tend to believe me because the weather here is nice. If I said to you that it was a mistake to leave Boston where it was nice to come here to Prague where it's snowing, you would not believe it was nice in Boston or that it's snowing here in Prague. The point being, if I tell you one thing is true, you will believe the second thing is true, even though you haven't a clue whether or not I'm telling the truth or not. That is the way politicians behave. And a good politician will tell you a few things that are true before he tells you a few things that are not true, because you will then believe all the things he has said, true and untrue. If he starts off by telling you things you know are untrue, followed by a lot of things that are true, you would have a disbelief in everything he said, even if he was now telling the truth. It's fascinating. It's a wonderful business. I'm going to do a kind of different level of lecture. I'm going to talk a little bit about politics as a game, as a process, as a campaign method. I'm going to talk a little bit about the way things have changed over the years and are changing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the way the world is today and how I think it is revolving because of the political situation that we find ourselves in, and primarily because of the economic situation we find ourselves in. I'm going to go draw pictures. Can you guys hear me from here? Okay. There are 4 resources in politics, and only 4. There is money. The first question is, how much resources does a campaign have to distribute the information it wishes to distribute? I should make this premise that there are 3 points to any message. There's the message. You're for and against education. You're for or against crime. You're for or against pensions. Whatever you're for and against. Message. There is the messenger. Who says it? The person who says it either gives credibility to the message or takes away. Bill Clinton, in a very famous speech to the American Congress, called for school uniforms for public school children. The Congress stood and applauded. There is a right-wing politician in the U.S. called Pat Buchanan. If Pat Buchanan said, we need school uniforms for public school kids, America would have gasped. They would have thought brown shirts. The question is not just the message, but the messenger. And it has totally different meaning depending on who says what to whom. But the third that is completely overlooked is the distribution system. To whom do you say it? If you're going to talk about a young people's issue, then you should be on MTV. If you're going to talk about the pensions, then you shouldn't be on MTV. And knowing who gets to hear what is also part of the process game of politics. The money you have allows you a distribution system. Sometimes it helps to develop the message, but mostly it is for distribution. People. People in politics are important, but I don't mean like people in the room. I mean like organizations. If you are the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, you're going to have a lot of support because you're the fundamentalist group in the Green Party, environmentalist. You get structural identification where people identify with a group, and that group could be, like in the United States, Hillary Clinton did better among women than she did among non-women. Barack Obama, of course, did better with African Americans than with non-African Americans. John McCain did better with veterans than he did with non-veterans. So the group you belong to, ODS may do well, for example, with the business community in Austria, so that you get identification based on who you are to some extent, but also how you're perceived and who the candidate is. The third of the four resources is the candidate. Who is he? Who is she? Tall, short. The taller candidate wins American elections 75% of the time. Looks matter. Size matters. And the candidate, it's not just are they tall or short, not only are they good looking or not good looking, but what do they represent? In a time of war, we like generals. In Israel, almost everybody who's been successful, because they're always in a state of war, needs to have a military background. So I did Ariel Sharon's campaigns, for example, and the fact that he was a great war hero to the Israelis was a big plus. Charles de Gaulle, Dwight Eisenhower. These are people who are seen as having a qualification that's important. Right now, the economy is a mess all over the world, so we're looking at business people to become leaders in the public arena. But who the candidate is, what their positives and negatives are obviously very important. The fourth resource that I haven't mentioned is time. And time is the most important resource, and it's the one always forgotten. Time allows you to raise money, to build identification with groups, and of course to create a candidacy and an image. $1 million on the last day of a campaign is worth 1 million times 0 equals 0. $1 million 6 months ahead of time allows you to do a lot of things. So time, people always say in politics, we have plenty of time to get started. No. You may have plenty of time to spend the money, to distribute it, but you don't have a lot of time to create these resources. These resources constantly need to be created. By the way, these are the only 4 resources in politics. The only 4. I've never seen a 5th. Now, there are also 3 kinds of candidates. There are personality candidates, issue candidates, and structure candidates. Let me start with structure. When I say structure, what I mean is identification. In every community, in every election, there is a group who will always vote for that group regardless of what the issues are, what the candidates are. Most of the election, by the way, in the United States it's as much as 80%, of the election is over before the first vote or even the candidates are chosen. Because Democrats vote Democrat, Republicans vote Republicans, there's very little switching around. In Albania, the number is in the 90 percentile. Less than 10% of the people in Albania ever switch their vote. It's tribal voting. The people who, like a Green Party, or let's say like in Israel you have a party called Shas. Shas is a religious party. They wear funny clothes, they say funny things, nobody knows what they're saying, and it doesn't matter, they have 10% of the vote. They get the same 10% whether the guy's for this or against that, doesn't make any difference. They get the structural vote, period. And you have probably constituencies here that are the same. The old communists. Whatever that electorate group gets is what that group gets. It doesn't move a lot. Structural voting, depending on the society in which you're in, usually takes up anywhere from 60 to 90% of the vote. So almost all of the votes are already decided before you get started, which is why you shouldn't spend a lot of time trying to get votes. There is a difference, however. There are campaigns where you try to get people not to vote for the candidates. I call that rejectionist voting. New York State, the first U.S. Senate race I did in New York State that was successful goes back to 1970. This is coming in and out now. Is 1970. At that time, the Republicans and the Democrats in New York State were almost even. In 1980, I did a race for a man named Al D'Amato, the first of 3 successful U.S. Senate races. When he ran in 1980, there were 500,000 more Democrats than Republicans. When George Pataki in 1994 was elected governor, there were 1.2 million more Democrats than Republicans. In the year 2004, when Pataki won his last race for governor, there were 2.1 million more Democrats than Republicans. I sat down with some people the other day, somebody who wants to run for the Senate in New York, and the numbers now are 2.7 million more Democrats than Republicans. You cannot win in New York as a Republican, but you can if you can create a negative vote against the Democratic candidate among Democrats be successful. The Republicans are irrelevant. In the case of Al D'Amato, he ran for the U.S. Senate 4 times. I never once put him on television to talk. Not once. He didn't do one commercial where he spoke. He was completely irrelevant to the campaign. The campaigns were vicious and mean. We attacked the opponent over and over again. I never showed them Al D'Amato. If you saw Al D'Amato, you'd know why. But we never talked about it. It just was just totally negative. If he were to run today, I wouldn't even show his face. I would just be negative, 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 because you can't possibly win otherwise. Issue campaigns. We all think issues matter. They kind of do and kind of don't. They are important only because they tell you who the character in the play is. In other words, if I'm a businessman, I will talk about the economy endlessly. And I will talk about how important the economy is and how I'm going to cut the deficit and create jobs and spur the economy and reduce taxes and balance the budget. All of which you can say for anybody, but if you're a businessman, he starts off by saying, as a businessman, I know that in order to create jobs, we must do A, B, C. If he's a soccer player, and he says, as a soccer player, I know, in order to create jobs, we have to do A, B, C, it has no meaning. So having the dress to be able to talk to the issues, not the issues, are what matters. Jump to personality. You have certainly had personalities here in the Czech Republic. I got to meet a couple along the way. And Personality voting is very, very important because it's the one vote that overwhelms structure or issues. If I like you, I may vote for you even if I totally disagree with you and you're not part of my party or not part of my structure. Top 09 in the last election, that fellow who looks like a piece out of the Monopoly board looks like he's a personality. And he's a figure that people identified with, for better or for worse. I don't know if anybody here is watching Donald Trump in the United States, but it's mind-boggling. It's just pure personality. John Kennedy was personality, not substance, not structure, personality. Ronald Reagan had a lot of that. Yes, Reagan had issues of freedom, but Reagan was a personality who people liked, and because they liked him, it was easier to capture some of this. Likability is important only if you want somebody who's likable as opposed to a mean SOB who can fix the problem at hand. Let me get to the next point. Right now, the world is in this terrible economic crisis. It appears, at least from my travels around, to be much worse than it feels to most of us. There is real anger at a certain base level. People are not, I say there are three kinds of people in the world right now. There are the unemployed, the underemployed, and those who are afraid of being unemployed or underemployed. And what's happening is, this is particularly true of young people out of poor socioeconomic classes. And so we are seeing young men, primarily, take to the streets in country after country and in political movement after political movement, both in the West, but also in North Africa now, in the Arab states, etc. The kids who are on the streets of Cairo, I submit, weren't there because of the because of the desire for freedom, but rather because of the economic crisis. They do not have a job or the money to sustain themselves or to have hope for a better future. Until and unless the economic crisis is solved, we're going to see these movements. There is a belief in the West, I said this upstairs, there's a belief in the West that the end result of these movements will be to have more freedom in the world. I do not necessarily believe that to be true. I think all we're going to see is stronger, not weaker governments, and we are going to see a call for stronger, not weaker personalities. We are going to look for men and sometimes women who are capable of bringing their strength to government. What does that mean? It means that Yobics in Hungary last year, which is a race we did not for Yobics, I did Viktor Orban, but in Hungary, we saw Yobics receive 17% of the vote, get within 2% of the socialist government's vote, and become a real power on the streets, even though their message was, it's the Roma's fault, it's the gypsies' fault. Get the gypsies. Here in the Czech Republic, you have also movements that are developing. One political party was outlawed by your Supreme Court because it was too extreme. In France today, the leading party in the polling data in France is Le Pen's, an anti-Muslim party. In Denmark, the same phenomena. In Sweden and Finland, we have seen anti-Muslim parties become important in developing coalitions for their governments, which are nominally socialist, and now include these ethnically charged but angry parties, and they're all saying the same thing. They're taking our jobs. They're taking away our way of life. In the United States, by the way, it's the Tea Party, and the anger is at the Mexicans. Not even all Hispanics, the Mexicans. Why we pick one group over another to hate and why we single them out for the failures, the point is the economic crisis is severe. It is creating an energy source around which these movements take place. A not-so-secret secret here in the Czech Republic, during the last election in last May, you had riots in Greece over failed economy. We used the riots in Greece to transform our campaign from a more broad-based campaign to one that simply stated, if you follow the socialists, you will follow on the road to Greece. In other words, the point still was, the word in English is xenophobic. I don't know what it is in the Czech, but it's supernationalism. People now being asked to give money to Greece again, or to Portugal, or to Ireland, are furious. Take care of our own first. Nationalistic, and it's very much what we expect governments and people to act like. How does this affect the world? Totally. Totally. Because what it does is it sets up the reason people vote for whom they vote. It sets up the environment in which the campaign occurs. I always say that politics is a three-dimensional chess game. You make a move, somebody else makes a move, and then the hand of God comes in and he makes a move. A collapse of the economy in Portugal is a hand of God. The Greece going into riots was a hand of God act. The bombing of Libya, the capture of Osama, any of the things that can happen, or earthquakes. It is amazing how quickly the political world can change. People who are certain about, one of the reasons politics is so much fun for somebody like me is because it is forever changing. It is kind of looking at a shoreline and you see the waves on the beach. They look alike, but over time they're always different. And there are sometimes when storms come through, and sometimes tidal waves come through. And it's always an ever-changing fact. Let me go back to what I started with. The most important fact is the fact that no one knows anything about anything. And so your job in the political world is to tell people to know what they don't need to know, want to know, or care about knowing. And you've got to make it interesting. So we use humor. I did a commercial years ago in Albania, which I loved. It was a picture of a sumo wrestler, a picture of a kangaroo, and a picture of my opponent. And it says, "What do these three have in common?" And the announcer said, "None of them know anything about Albania." The opponent got really angry and held a press conference saying, "They compared me to an animal, to a kangaroo." So then everybody wanted to see the commercial. So it made it even worse for him. But there is stuff like that all the time. Means nothing, means everything. And understanding that it's not an intellectual discourse. The end result is very important. Who we elect to office is very, very important. But how they get elected? They can get elected for the silliest of reasons. You know, there's the famous Nixon-Kennedy debate in the United States where people in those days, people were still listening. It was 1960. It's 50 years ago. People were listening to radio. And the people who listened to the debate on radio thought Nixon won. And the people who saw it on television thought Kennedy won overwhelmingly. The words were the same, but the look was different. And they voted on the look, not the words. We learned that. You know, since the 1960s, since the early 70s, when they had Richard Nixon and Lyndon Johnson, no American politician has been ugly. Lyndon Johnson was ugly as can be. He could not have been elected today. He shouldn't have been elected then, but he couldn't be elected now. We want nice-looking people. By the way, women, it's very different. Women who run as public individuals need to look mannish. So you will almost always see every woman who runs in a pantsuit. Almost every single one, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Angela Merkel or whomever, they will always be, Tzipi Livni in Israel, they will almost always be in a pantsuit. You almost never see them in a dress. Because they don't want to look feminine, because feminine isn't strong enough. They have to look masculine. Now, men, don't have to look terribly masculine, but they can't be ugly. You can't go like this. I told a very, very wealthy guy, it was clearly a mistake on my part, he was very wealthy, that he shouldn't run for some office because he didn't look like a president. Left a lot of money on the table, but he's a good guy. You know who he is too. But that it matters. Something as simple as that, something as meaningless as that, is terribly meaningful. One of the guys looking to run in the United States for president is a fellow named Mitch Daniels. Mitch Daniels is about this high. He's the governor of the state of Indiana. He's a pretty conservative guy, pretty fiscally responsible, pretty good on issues, pretty good on ideas, but he's this high. And when the people get a picture of him, because, everybody so far, his own photographs always take him like this, but as soon as he stands next to somebody and people see he's this high, my guess is his candidacy collapses. Again, not because of ideas, but because of a much more important thing. What does he look like? In any event, I promised I would babble on for a while and then take some questions and hopefully give some answers. So if you would like, I'll be happy to answer some questions. Take it open. Thank you. Is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor is now open for questions.
I spurred a lot of interest.
All right, go ahead. Oh, sure.
Works. Should we introduce ourselves? Or? Okay, I should. I'm an elected politician, actually. I work in the European Parliament. And the question is, because you started your work a long time ago, 40 years ago, and the ways and means how to live the message were quite different then than they are now. What, in a few words, how would you characterize the difference between, let's say, beginning of 70s and now? What are the main difference in delivering the message in both, technological ways and in content as well?
Let me come up. Actually, thank you for asking that, because that's a whole section I really did want to get into. And I can't answer it in a few words, so I apologize. Back then, I started writing about two concepts that I had. One I called the fragmentation of information, and the second one was the velocity of communication. Let me talk about fragmentation first. At that time, television was growing, and even though it hadn't become the huge cable kind of everywhere place that it's become, it was growing. It had some more stations. Newspapers and magazines were proliferating. When I was a kid growing up, a magazine, a weekly magazine, was Look or Life magazine in the States, and what they would do is they would have 2 pages on healthcare, 3 pages on politics, a page on science, 3 pages on sports, something on gardening. I mean, it was an everything magazine, and with nothing in it, just pictures, basically, and little stories. Well, because of the fragmentation of information, instead of having 1 page on tennis once a year in this magazine, you suddenly had 20 magazines on tennis. Today you have hundreds of magazines on tennis. So you have more and more information about smaller and smaller things. Television itself has gone in that way, and of course the internet is going to make it even more true, so that people are capable of knowing more and more about less and less. You can sit home and watch the Golf Channel 24 hours a day, know everything there's ever been known about golf, but know nothing about anything else. And in fact, the news programming on cable and the websites means that the people who will seek out news are news seekers, whereas all of this rest of the body public, which may be 60%, who have no interest, will find a way not to get any information. The daily newspaper circulations everywhere in the world are way down. People get their information from the internet or from cable, but the number of channels that they seek, there are so many that you can absolutely just get the information you want. There was a very famous television program called the Ed Sullivan Show back in the 60s, and it was a variety show. And they would have a guy come on with a puppet, and then they'd have the Bolshoi Ballet, then they'd have the Beatles, and then they'd have an acrobat. Those programs are dead. You can watch all the opera you want, but you don't have to listen to anything else. You never have to see a juggler again in your life if you don't want to see one. And that's brand new. That's one, put that over here, fragmentation of information. I'll get to the answer to the question. The second is velocity of communication. What happened was the speed in which we received information increased to such an extent that it's now real time. In other words, when the U.S. is invading a country, CNN has its cameras capturing the invasion. It is mind-boggling. We watched Barack Obama watching the SEALs take out Osama bin Laden. It cannot be believed in terms of the way the world is. So speed of information. You pick up a newspaper, it's old news. It was yesterday. It was 6 hours ago. So it has to be very, very fast, and this speaks to your issue. The people who are going to be successful going forward in politics are those who are going to understand the fragmentation. Remember I said MTV is no place for a pension message. And those that are capable of also understanding the speed in which it must be delivered and taken advantage of. Riots in Greece, next day you have to have a statement, 3 days later it's too late. So you have to be, we have to be faster on our feet, we have to be faster in our thinking, we can be less thoughtful in how we make decisions, and makes time even more important. So this is a very, very important question, and it's going to get worse. because your children are going to grow up in a world in which there were never any breadth of information. Everything they will have known, they will have gotten off of their 7 favorite blogs. And God knows what information they're going to get and the speed in which they get it. I cannot believe that newspapers in a hard copy will be around in 40 years. I don't think it'll be there. I don't think print will be there. You know, when we send out mail, and I love sending mail, you send mail to people my age, because my age still reads it. If you're in your 20-somethings, you don't read mail. You read emails. And even there, you click a button and get rid of it. So it's a what you're raising is everybody who does politics in the world needs to think about fragmentation of information, velocity of communication. They have come together into a bam, serious place. Okay, thank you. Yes? I might as well just stand.
Hello, my name is Jan Kretschmer. I'm a part-time consultant. When you mentioned velocity of information, does this mean that in the future people who are used to instant information will be convinced of issues or candidates faster than they are at the moment? And what does this mean for the time you need in order to prepare a campaign? Coming back to one of the 4 factors, does this mean the time will increase, or will you need to spend more time on the fragmented issues?
Wonderful. Actually, Barack Obama is a perfect example of both of those things. Barack Obama was a state senator, a minor legislative figure, 4 years before he was president. He went from being this minor figure in a state legislature in Illinois. He then won a U.S. Senate race. Excuse me. Excuse me. He then won a U.S. Senate race as a candidate of structure, and because he was an African-American Democrat in a very African-American state with lots of Democratic advantages. So he won. He then gets to the United States Senate, immediately runs for the presidency, but the way he does is utilizes the new social media and is able to become a darling of a segment of the population that is Twittered in and blogged in, raises $750 million through the internet. I might add the second to Barack Obama was Ron Paul in terms of his success on the internet. But he became overnight, he existed. Whereas an Ariel Sharon in Israel was a warrior in the 48 war. He led a group in Lebanon in the 80s. He did such and such in the 90s. That was the old traditional way. You built up awareness level. Barack Obama was exactly this, from nowhere. And we can get the from nowhere candidates all over the world now. It is just a question of figuring out, and this goes to this, figuring out how to get that done. How to put on that suit that makes you acceptable very quickly. And you could pick a very narrow issue. And remember, the issue can be very emotional rather than rational. Somebody who sits there and says, I have a 7-point plan for fixing the pension system is going to disappear. But the guy who says, I'll tell you what we have to do, throw them out. Get rid of those people. Pick a name of a group. Could quickly become, and it becomes scary because it can happen so fast. And no, less time needs to be spent figuring it out. But time also will go faster. So, if you become an overnight sensation, you will fall apart also overnight. So there has to be at least some building. But it's that's why movie stars and, in the United States, movie stars, Ronald Reagan, took advantage of that stardom to become, who thought Ronald Reagan, a movie star, could be president? But that's what happened. Now the blogs are basically supplanting the movie stars. It's fascinating. It's fascinating looking forward. Love the question. Okay, anything else?
Jedlička. I'm a student of this school and I run an internet website, reformy.cz. And I would like to ask you, what do you think are the chances of Ron Paul being elected actually? Because he's probably going to run as an independent. So he's up against two political parties. This bipartisan system, which is sort of running the same budget deficit and same politics for many years now. What do you think are the chances?
Well, Ron Paul, I keep saying about Ron Paul is that unfortunately he's not really a serious political figure. He won't run as an independent, I don't think, by the way. I think he'll run as a Republican, stay as a Republican. I think he'll stay as a Republican because of his son. I think his son 4 years from now will make a serious race for the presidency. And I think you'll see that more likely to occur than Ron Paul seriously contended. Ron Paul will end up with 3% of the vote or 5% of the vote, but he plays a very important role in helping to define a freedom thing, a very complicated, and I'm not going to go into it here except to just talk about it. When I started in politics, the Republican Party only had two separate wings. One group of Republicans were free market people, and one group was anti-communist. They obviously had a lot in common. The anti-communists were anti-communists because they wanted the world to be free market, and they thought communists were undermining fundamental freedoms and free markets. And the free marketers wanted a Milton Friedman-esque kind of government. Over time, the Republican Party got involved in some other issues. Most importantly, in the 60s was the civil rights movement, and they opposed it. And they opposed the civil rights on libertarian basis. They opposed the civil rights movement because businesses had the right to employ who they wanted to at the price they wanted to, etc., even if blacks were being denied access. So somebody like Barry Goldwater, who I started with and who I loved, and I have the big picture of me and Goldwater in my office, it's one of my few heroes, was opposed to the Civil Rights Bill. But in fact, it gave off the idea that he was a racist, not that he was an economic libertarian. And so the Republican Party attracted racists. Again, the point is the rational argument and the emotional argument are two different arguments. And we didn't know, I didn't know that back then, of course. But Republicans were filled with these racists, and after we were filled with racists, we were filled with people who were evangelical religionists, who followed behind them. And so we had three wings all of a sudden. We had this economic libertarian wing, we had this foreign policy anti-communist wing, but we had a group of people who didn't like blacks and who were religious and looked very much like Yobics, frankly, joining the party. And what has happened over time is the libertarian side that, well, first of all, communism collapsed. And so when communism collapsed, this wing disappeared or got much smaller. The free marketers all of a sudden found themselves with the racists and were very uncomfortable. And so now you have a party that has an economic side, but you also have this other side. And so when you talk about people like Michelle Bachmann or there's a Senator Santorum, these people are running. Mike Huckabee just pulled himself out of the presidential race this weekend. Mike Huckabee is an economic liberal. and a social conservative. I mean, he's the exact reverse of what libertarians are, and he's one of the leaders of the party. So Ron Paul's job is to try to keep the Republican Party geared towards its economic base, but it might be a losing effort. I don't know where this is heading, but I do know that the growth of this group, particularly, again, this goes back to what I said earlier, about the economic problems of the world, these people, anti-Mexican, anti-Muslim, these people are growing and growing and growing in the United States and will continue to grow on those issues. They will talk about the economy, but it's not what they're about. They're about anger. And as long as the unemployment rate stays high, this group will grow. It would not surprise me, not that Ron Paul won't be nominated, that won't surprise me, but it would surprise me if one of these people are not nominated by the Republicans, and if they are, then Barack Obama will win re-election. And Barack Obama is a disaster for America, for the world. My view, these people are no better. We have a problem. We have a problem. The leadership of this world, and this goes to the question, is are there people out there who can now, as Barry Goldwater once did, hold up a flag of freedom and fight for free markets, freedom among people, freedom among countries? Right now, it's not really growing; it's really shrinking. So that's a very pessimistic view, but it's my view. Sorry. How to counter that? You run. I'll do the race. You run.
Hi, my name is Javier Zataka. You outlined the threat of something like a return to the politics of the 1930s as a result of the economic downturn,
Yes.
sort of a rise of populism and xenophobia. Well, so far it seems, relative to the depth of the recession, it's not that bad in the United States. That's number one. Number two, if we are back to the 30s, what does it matter, all the blogging and the instant media? I mean, Hitler just used the radio, and he was pretty good at that. And thirdly, I'll ask you the difficult question, the ethical question. What you're saying basically is if you want to run a good right-wing candidate right now, rather than talk about free markets, you talk about the danger from X and the need to get rid of X, and that would get the fellow elected. At the same time, you would be feeding the flames. What would you do?
Yeah, it's a real problem, isn't it? Well, first of all, let me talk about the fundamental part of your question, which was that I'm comparing it to the 1930s. As a matter of fact, what I have said to people is that because of my work here in Eastern Europe, and particularly watching Yobics in Hungary, but not just Yobics in Hungary, watching what's happening with Strata in Austria and elsewhere, is that if the unemployment rate was 35%, not 9%, not 10%, then maybe we would be watching the rise of another Hitler type, because you can now see how it happened. You could see how the anger developed into something much larger. I agree with you, it's not anywhere near as bad, but the fact that this has happened in this economy, I can't imagine how the pressure must have been in the 30s with 30% unemployment, and the anger level and the ability not to look for freedom, but to look for a strong leader who would tell those people to stop. Again, whoever those people are. As far as the ethical questions I face as a political guy, I've always felt that the only person who really can speak for me is me. So I always have the problem of supporting people who disagree with me on something, sometimes many, many things. Sometimes I can work for somebody because I like them. Sometimes I can work for somebody because, frankly, it doesn't matter whether he wins or somebody else wins. There's no difference. it would be very hard for me to work for somebody with whom I have fundamental disagreements against somebody with whom I more agree. If it's close, it doesn't matter. But if it's substantial, there are 3 candidates for the United States presidency this year who have asked me to do their race for president, and I've said no in all 3 cases. All Republicans, obviously, all conservatives. But I've said no because the presidency is so important that I want somebody who at some level I agree with. I mean, I hate the Republican field. There is nobody out there right now that I feel, Ron Paul did not ask me, there is nobody out there. See, that I would do now, even if it isn't serious, just because it would be fun to do and the right thing to do. I have a real problem, and the ethical part of this is exactly right. I said upstairs that I went into this as a kid to change the world because I was an absolute ideologue. I would stand outside on soapboxes in Greenwich Village at 3 o'clock in the morning and argue with people about the nature of freedom. I was one of those. I still am, kind of. But I said I wanted to change the world. And I said I did. I made it worse. And it wasn't what I wanted to do. But this is an ethical question about where do you go. One of the things you have to like about Ron Paul is that he has gone down without much votes year after year after year. But he says what he wants to say and he does what he wants to do. My job is to elect other people and to stay in the background. That's what I've chosen to do. Is it the right choice? I can't replay it now, so it's what it is. But it's a tough one. It's a very tough ethical question you raised. Thank you for the question.
All right.
Anything else?
Thank you. If I could have a follow-up question.
Yes, please.
I've recently read a book by Obama's czar, Kassanstein, about spreading rumors, and he says that because of the information cascade and all the thing, it's actually very dangerous to help spreading the half-truth or information that are not 100% right, that it is a danger for democracy as such. You are an expert on spreading things around. Right. You say that you feel being constrained by your conscious virtue, whatever. Right. But would you join Sunstein in arguing that you, in the name of saving democracy, you need to limit the freedom of speech, at least a little bit?
No, I would never limit the freedom of speech, even a little bit. But the problem raised is very real. In other words, because of the internet, anybody can write anything about anybody at any time. And it's accepted as truth because we accept things as truth, and as you know, clarifying a mistruth is much more difficult than just making an attack. So it's very bad, but freedom of speech is sacrosanct to me, and I would never limit it. I also do not knowingly engage in that, by the way. I do not slander somebody without proof, but with proof, I'm happy to. In other words, I have no problem, saying this guy voted to raise taxes 20 years ago on fish. And he says, I never raised taxes. I haven't done it in 20 years. You raised it on fish. Argue that. But lying has never been my specialty. Even though I have a reputation for doing it, it's not what I do. I never have done it. I've never knowingly lied about anybody. I've run very tough races, but I've never lied about anybody.
Good afternoon.
Except maybe this guy, I like that.
I would like to ask you, what do you think about negative campaigning, and where are some borders of it?
Negative campaigning is an unfair title because it suggests that what you're saying is untrue. Negative campaigning just means that you speak about the failings of your opponent as opposed to the virtues of your candidate. So if I said, I am the only candidate in this race who has voted time and time again to reduce taxes, you'd say that's perfectly okay. If I said, she is the only candidate in this race who has voted to raise taxes time and time again, that would be negative campaigning. Why? It seems to me that it's perfectly legitimate for me to say, I won't raise taxes, you will raise taxes. I haven't raised taxes, you have raised taxes. Vote for me, you know where I stand. Vote for her, you'll get a tax increase. That's a typical commercial. And it's called negative campaigning, but it isn't. What people usually mean by negative campaigning is a picture of somebody in a bedroom, like the IMF guy with the maid, what was he doing to that maid in that chamber? By the way, isn't it amazing that this poor guy, 48 hours ago, was a great, respected leader of the world, and without a single proven bit of evidence, he is now a joke for me standing here in Prague to this group. And most everybody knows what I'm talking about, which is what we do with the velocity of communications and how easy it is to destroy somebody over what it may turn out that she was blackmailing him and there was nothing going on. Doesn't matter. He's dead. She's a celebrity. She'll write a book now. My Night with the IMF. And but back to the negative campaigning, it is too easy and it is too powerful because we really don't want to know what he thinks. We really want to know who he's sleeping with. And we really want to know what drugs he takes or sells. I've heard about you. And we want to know who gave him a bribe to build that bridge. I have a 5-point plan to fix something. Who cares? I mean, the people really. Again, watch television programs. The programs that have the highest ratings are the ones that deal in nonsense. This story about the guy with the IMF, I don't mean to point to you, you weren't there, at least I've heard you weren't there, but this story with the guy from the IMF is just one of those stories, and it would be called negative campaigning if I did a campaign commercial that said, Hans whatever his name is, got caught in a bedroom with a maid. What happened? Click. Vote for Jones. See, I do love this stuff. And it's too easy, and that's the problem. And the problem is that also the speed in which it happens. You can cut somebody off at the neck instantly. This poor guy, what is he going to say to his kids in the morning? Let's say nothing happened. He will forever be destroyed. Doesn't matter if nothing happened. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous world we live in. And I don't think. But am I in favor of negative campaigning? Yes, as long as it's honest. Any more questions? Okay. I think we've done it. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you too. We can now switch into informal part of our event. There is some wine and cookies waiting for us to be eaten and discuss the virtue of negative campaigning.